Looking back on my childhood, a lot of my fondest memories of video games were when I got my GBA. I think everyone can appreciate that feeling of being sent to bed, and while your parents think you're asleep, sneaking your handheld under the covers and playing your game of choice. There's something so cozy about it, and while my first handheld was the GBA, there was another before it that was the king of this mood. The Game Boy was a revolutionary piece of technology in the 90s, and it's no surprise that it still holds such nostalgic power today. I trawled through itch to find 7 Game Boy inspired games that deserve your attention. These games may not all be technologically accurate, but they still manage to capture the essence of the Game Boy. So, get comfy, and let the shades of green wash over you. I'm always impressed when horror games use as minimal graphics as possible and still manage to be scary. Opossum Country is a short and simple game about a delivery boy delivering food to a camper van deep in the woods. What you discover there is a gated community waiting for doomsday, run by a leader who everyone seems to love, and a young girl who may be held there against her will. I won't spoil the story because it's only 10 minutes long, but I do want to talk about the art. The overworld looks pretty good. It doesn't feel too high quality for a Game Boy, however the part that I really want to focus on is the character art. Conversations have these overly detailed, uncanny valley sprites that do a really good job of unsettling you. There's this one character whose facial expressions are just amazingly creepy. The gameplay itself is very light, however there is a shooting minigame where you have to aim the crosshair to take out enemy opossums. It's not exactly deep, but it does feel like something straight out of a Game Boy game. The final thing I want to mention is the music. There's only a few tracks, but each one of them is so good. If I had to summarize this game in a nutshell, I'd say you take the setup and general vibe of the beginning of Outlast 2 and pop it into a Game Boy. I'd love to see some of these concepts expanded on, but for now, this is a neat little game. Ah, fishing. There's something so relaxing about it, especially in a video game. A lot of games will have their own fishing side quests and mechanics, but there's a whole genre of fishing games out there. But what if I told you there's also a whole slew of fishing games on itch.io, just waiting for you to reel in? Fishing Vacation is a simple game. One day, our protagonist receives a letter from his childhood friend, reminding him about a cabin they used to visit when they were kids. The cabin was owned by his friend's uncle, and while neither of them have heard from him in years, he suddenly received a letter and a key to the cabin. So, your friend decided to invite you to relive your childhood in one last fishing trip. The gameplay itself is your average fishing affair. You cast the line out by lining up a power meter, you wait for a bite, and then start reeling it in. I will say it gets a little bit repetitive, and there isn't really any benefit to catching everything in the level, but it doesn't overstay its welcome. Every morning you also have to go to the mud patch near the lake to catch some live bait, which determines how many fish you can catch in your session. You can relax, take in the sights of this Game Boy green lake, and catch yourself some trout. Of course, things aren't as they seem. Where is his uncle? Why is there a note in the cabin which seems to indicate he ran away? Where is his family? Why do things keep appearing and disappearing in the distance? I suppose you'll just have to find out for yourself. The game is about 30 minutes long the first time through, however there are 4 different endings. There's no real way to save or reload on specific days, so you will end up playing the prologue at least 3 times if you plan on getting all the endings. With some good scares and a unique premise, Fishing Vacation isn't your average indie game. It's the perfect length for something of its type, and the story is genuinely intriguing. So head on out to the woods, rod and bucket in hand, but be careful what you reel in. Moving away from horror for a minute, let's look at one of the more authentic games on this list. Crush is a top-down arcade-style action game created by Salt and Pixel, and it commits to the bit harder than any other game here. The story follows a typical sci-fi setup. An experimental super soldier cyborg was created by a company in the year 40XX, and now he's escaped. Playing as the soldier, you run and gun your way through multiple floors of copy-pasted goons, until you defeat enough of them to advance, eventually fighting a boss fight before climbing to the next stage. The aesthetics of the game are gorgeous. There's something about these faceless enemy sprites that's so nostalgic to me, and the intro art is beautiful. The gameplay itself is almost annoyingly authentic. You have one button that shoots your gun, and that's it. At least from what I saw in an hour playing the beta. If you hold shoot and move, you can strafe while firing, a fact that would have been nice to learn in the beginning. Once you get the hang of enemy movement and your mobility options, the game becomes a lot of fun. However, this is only a beta, so not everything is perfect. The health bar will often glitch out, showing you 2 bars when you actually only have 1, and enemies tend to run off screen sometimes, but those bugs are minor. One of the most frustrating aspects of the game is where I'd argue it's almost too authentic. Enemies can spawn from one of any of the 4 doors in the room. However, the only one that you can see clearly is the top one, meaning any of the other doors can spawn enemies on top of you without any warning. This results in a lot of situations where you're accidentally backed into one of these doors to avoid a group of enemies, only to have one of them spawn on top of you and kill you anyway. If there was at least an animation like with the top door, it wouldn't feel so annoying, so I hope they do something about that. Other than that, I really like this game. It feels like a relic of days gone by, and I'd love to see what other weapons and mechanics the creators add for the full release. Going from the most authentic to the least, The Night That Speaks is an exploration horror game a la Slender, and while it's clearly not something that could run on a Game Boy, it does its best impression of what a 3D horror game might look like on the system. The game begins in a graveyard with your character walking into a crypt. Your job is to explore the caverns, find notes left by previous trespassers, and try to find a way out without being caught by the roaming monsters. The monochrome color of the Game Boy aesthetic works perfectly for a horror game, as your light illuminates the corridors and obstacles, and the draw distance barely reaches a few feet in front of you, leading to you blindly rushing around, hoping not to run headfirst into one of the creatures. The map feels much bigger than it actually is because of this, but once you get your bearings, it's much easier to go where you want to in each run. The game isn't all difficult though. It does have one advantage that most of these styles of games don't have: a way to combat the threats. If you find yourself staring down the enemy, you can raise your middle finger to hold them in place. While this is a fun mechanic that gets you out of some tight spots, I wish you could strafe or have slightly better movement options. If you're trapped in a dead end, your finger isn't going to do much but delay the inevitable. Other than that, the game is surprisingly pretty, even given its lack of fidelity, and it also manages to get some good scares in. My only advice if you're going to play it is to pay attention to the notes. The requirements to get the ending isn't too obtuse, however, if you're not paying attention, you won't have a clue where to go. My heart will always reside in RPG Maker, and I haven't played a game that captures the essence of that genre in a while quite like Soul Void. This GB studio game from Katabura is about a soul who finds herself in the afterlife, although they don't remember how they got here. In this world, when souls travel to the other side, they can end up in a place called the Void. This is a sort of in-between realm with its own inhabitants, but lately, something has been dragging human souls in and corrupting them. The game itself is exploration based. You walk around, talk to NPCs, solve puzzles, and journey through the void to find a way home. Along the way, you meet characters with little side quests, asking you to deliver messages or items to other NPCs, which gives you a good incentive to explore and find all the NPCs you can. Another good incentive to explore is the art, because oh my god, this has to be some of the most beautiful pixel art I've seen in a long time. Some of the background elements and characters look stunning. Add this to the major characters you meet with highly detailed portraits and expressions, and you've got probably the best looking game on this list. The story itself is pretty good too, but I won't talk much about it considering the game is only about an hour long. During my playthrough, I found myself comparing it to a couple of things, but my immediate thoughts were a mix of Yume Nikki gameplay, early Pokemon aesthetic, and a little bit of Undertale dialogue. Lo and behold, when you get about 75% through the game, you run into a museum with these exact games mentioned. The only thing that I do unfortunately have to bring up is the game's fatal flaw. You walk into a room with beautiful sprite work, the story is ramping up in intensity, the mystery is starting to come together, you feel like you're really connecting with the game, and then silence. The game is dead silent. No character noises, no music, no sound effects, nothing. To make matters worse, when I played it, the game had this awful popping that was constantly plaguing my run, so I just had to mute my PC entirely. It's so sad because I think if it did have it, I'd be calling this an absolutely perfect hidden gem, but as it stands, it absolutely loses a lot of points for this. I'd still highly recommend it, and even the itch page warns you in advance about the music, but I can't say it didn't disappoint me. Soul Void is a beautiful game held back by its own limitations, but I would highly recommend checking out the creator Katabura on Twitter to see more of their beautiful artwork. Boomer shooters have been in a bit of a golden era lately, with tons of indie games trying to capture the essence of those early PC games like Doom and Wolfenstein. One of those developers is T19 Games. They wanted to answer the question, what would an FPS look like on Game Boy? Hellhunt GB 1991 is a Game Jam spin-off of their game Dread Templar, previously known as Hellhunt. The game features 3 levels with 3 weapons, and it is so cool. It's fast-paced, it runs remarkably well, the weapons are fun to shoot, it's got everything a boomer shooter could want. You can tell that the developer is experienced with playing and making these styles of games, just from this little demo alone. And while it's only about 10 minutes long, it has inspired me to check out their full release once it comes out. If I had to say one thing, it would have to be that I wish the game had ended with some sort of boss fight or had more enemy variety, but again, it's a Game Jam game. There's only so much you can expect. What is there is a competent experimental title that has me wishing for more. To round out this list, let's return to what I said right at the beginning about playing your handheld late into the night. Spooky Boi Advance is a genius game that combines that feeling with another universal childhood experience: fear of monsters in your closet. The game is simple. You have 30 rounds of a minigame collection to play on your Game Boy, and 5 bars of battery. Each time you lose a game, you lose a bar, but for every 3 you win, you get 1 back. However, there's something else in the room with you, just behind your Game Boy, out of sight. In order to stop it from getting you, you have to spend 1 battery to flash your torch at the wardrobe, and if you fail to keep checking, or run out of battery, think of it like FNAF, except the game you're actually playing is more like a WarioWare style minigame collection. This game is honestly genius. It's such a smart concept, and the way they execute it is perfect. Each of the games are fairly easy on their own. You've got things like Frogger, skiing downhill, jumping over obstacles, and most of them require some level of concentration. However, in order to stop the monster, you have to look away from the screen at some point, and sometimes you can't wait till the game is over to do it. So you have to try and predict not only when the monster will appear, but also when it's safe for you to look away from the games. As you get further in, the games get harder, but you'll also start to recognize the audio and visual cues that symbolize how close the monster is. It's a really interesting game, and it does a fantastic job of conveying that feeling of sitting up late at night with only the glow of your handheld to illuminate the room and shadows dancing in your peripherals. I would highly recommend you check it out, and if you do, then good luck. You never know when the monster might just try and get you.